Hello and welcome to the podcast with AntWalk, the attempt to bring global voices on varied topics of people and capabilities in the age of AI. And today, to discuss this, we have Sid Nayar from Freshworks. Sid, first of all, thank you so much for being part of this podcast and welcome.
Thank you, Sudhanshu. A pleasure to be here. Excited for this conversation.
To begin the conversation, we would start by getting to know you a little better. So, could you walk us through your professional journey, introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yeah, no, absolutely. My professional journey is an interesting one. So I'm a trained lawyer by training, and I had sort of my JD MBA. And early in my career, my passion for when I went to law school was really around international human rights and sort of, international relations. And that morphed into really kind of problem solving at a more of a broader level. And then I started my career as a consultant and then got into, fortunate enough to get into tech where I started at Cisco, then went to VMware, and then went to Salesforce, and now I'm at Freshworks for the last 4 months. And it's been a beautiful journey from hardware to perpetual to SaaS, right? And I played different roles, right? So I know we'll talk a lot about HR, but I've been fortunate enough to play what I think now we call business transformation. But when we were getting started, that had different words: operational excellence, process, whatever you want to call it. I played different roles across the enterprise in different functions. I've been in go-to-market ops. I've been in, channel space, partner space, services space, finance, and now HR. And then all different roles that you can imagine. And it allows me, I think, to connect the dots, which is my joy. And how do you, use all these different various toolkits and knowledge to actually drive, solve problems and drive forward. So that's a little bit about my journey, and I'm very excited to be here.
Sid, you are currently in HR strategy at Freshworks, right? But as you were saying, your journey spans across hardware, software, SaaS, and you have been in the driving seat for transformation and operational challenges and transformations. So, can you share a defining moment that fueled your passion of propelling business transformation now at this intersection of human potential and technology? Because that is where a lot of good development is happening right now.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. It's hard to narrow one moment, but maybe I'll share an incident that was more of an observation. So at first, when I came to VMware, I was a manager at the time in the renewals organization, which was, a big part of their revenue. And I had come on to take over a program, which is a very simple program. It's a reporting program. They were trying to build reporting for the renewal business. It was some baseline reports. What I was observing as I was taking it on is this program had been going for months, and we were just not moving forward. And what we were not moving forward was reports were built, the IT teams were doing great work. Nobody was using these reports, right? And as I dug deeper, I started to talk to stakeholders. I started to understand, try to understand why weren't people using it. And then it kind of like the aha moment for me was, well, there was no sort of what I call preconditions for success of these programs was done. There was no advocacy for why we were building these reports. There was no engagement up front. It was this mentality of build and they'll use or they'll come, right? And it kind of like was a lesson, even though I wasn't initially driving that program, kind of took to heart that just because you build it, people are not going to use it, even if it's great, right? So how do you bring people along the journey became a passion of mine. And I think when we talk about business transformation, which I love the way you framed it, it is the intersect of a business need and people's willingness to actually adopt that need, right? And how do you move forward, right? And I think and then we bring sort of, even with these big transformations, ultimately it's about adoption, right? And if you don't do that, then really great capabilities are sitting there, and a lot of work has gone down, and people are not leveraging it. So that was kind of an aha moment that became kind of a mantra for me as I look at things. And the question I always ask in my head, which a lot of change professionals may resonate with, is what is in for them? We call it a BIFM in the space. That why do people care, right? And if they don't care, should they care? And if they should care, how do we make them care? Right. So I think, that designing things not just for the product's sake or the capability's sake, but for the usability sake has become a very big passion of mine.
That's a very useful mantra, not just for internal stakeholders, but I'm very sure a lot of SaaS platforms undergo that challenge. And especially as founders, we build stuff and we look at functionalities and we develop products. We think, this is something that people should use, but start thinking about it from a usability perspective, adoption perspective. That is very, very important. It kind of, reminds me of a article that I recently read about why they put mirrors in the elevator. Old elevators used to take a lot of time to go up and down, and it was not very comfortable, the early elevators. So a lot of people would feel waiting inside the elevator not worth the wait. And they would say, and there were not very tall buildings back then when the elevators were there, like 3, 4 stories. So people were used to walking. They would say, "Okay, I would rather take the stairs." Then they put a psychologist to understand what they, and increasing the speed was not an option back then because it had its own challenges, technical limitations. So somebody said, it's not the time that is there in the lift, but how do you spend the time? Now, the best way people spend time is by looking at yourself. So when you get inside a mirror, now you have I know you get inside an elevator, you spend most of the time looking at yourself and you don't really know how much time you spend inside the elevator. A lot of SaaS platforms, they undergo this. You build things, but adoption and usability is a key factor. Now, when we talk about HR, human resources as a section, what capabilities you believe that what should HR leaders focus on? What kind of capabilities should they invest in?
I'll take a step back, right? So you're talking to somebody who's not a lifelong HR leader, right? And I never look at myself as an HR leader or finance leader or whichever function I worked in. I'm a business leader. So the first thing I would say, and the fact that the role that I'm doing, and lately I've been getting approached by a lot of HR roles, I think fundamentally is there has been a shift of what is expected of HR leaders, right? And for and foremost is they need to be great business leaders. They need to understand the business. So I would say that's the biggest thing, right? Because 10 years ago, when I would talk to my friends in HR, they were focused on being HR leaders, understanding the intricacies of HR. That's kind of table stakes. And in some sense, I think people are willing to even say, okay, if you have some base knowledge, you can develop that. But I need what's non negotiable is do you understand the business? Because the biggest thing that I think is happening over the last decade and is going to happen even more is how do we search, get, develop, manage top talent? And that top talent, even in the day of AI, is going to get harder and harder to retain because it's a limited supply, right? So the only way you can drive your business to do that as an HR organization is if you understand the business, you understand the talent, you understand the mentality of that talent. So I think one is business intimacy, right? Speak the business language. Understand why, you're in service of the business, you're in the service of the employees, of your stakeholders. So I think the first thing is that level of understanding and intimacy with your business and stakeholders. So I think that's super, super critical. The second, I think, is historically, I've observed a lot of HR functions thinking of themselves as back office, right? I think you need to fundamentally break that mentality, right? You can be a leading function, right? Because just like product is integral to your, success, so is sales. Behind all that is people, and you are the people leader, right? And not only are you the people leader, one of your responsibilities to create an environment and other leaders to really care about people so they can thrive, right? So I feel it's a very critical function. And if it's done well, it's very strategic. And it's not just internal, it's also external, right? Like to your point, if you're building a flawless employee experience, it's one thing I'm focused on. What's different about that in customer experience, right? It just, you create an environment, if people are people, right? So whether it's internal or external, you create an environment and a mechanism where people are feeling they can do their best work, they're engaged, they are accountable, they're building great products, they're building, selling great products. And that is a very, that's what we call culture, right? And that's the environment that you are building, and you are helping other management leaders and senior leaders, coaching them at times to build that environment and make sure that's what we get, right? So I would say, seeing your role very differently is very, very important, and that's a big part of the shift that I'm seeing in HR.
Yes, absolutely. And as we see this transformation, as you rightly put, people are at the center today and tomorrow. So we might be talking about AI, and there are a lot of focus being put on building the right technology. But behind that technology has to no, it is going to be people. Now, the people are behind it, people capabilities behind it. So when you talk about taking organizations forward, people are going to play a very crucial role, and that is why all HR leaders need to be business leaders, because you are taking the organization forward. One thing that you know is cornerstone of the way you operate your leadership style is servant leadership. How do you prioritize the well-being and growth of your team, and when you're especially driving strategic initiatives, and how does that leadership style help you foster your culture of excellence that you were talking about, or great employee experiences as you were talking about?
So servant leadership is been around as a concept for a long time, and just for folks who may not be that familiar, the basic concept is that you're in service of your team, right? Not the other way around. Because I think we've all been in organizations that feels the opposite. It feels like your leader feels like you're there, he or she is doing you a favor, and you're there to serve them. That's not what great leaders do, right? And I'm not saying I'm a great leader, but I aspire to be one. Uh, I think it's really important to first understand what does it mean to be a leader, right? Like, and I'll give an example, and maybe I know your audience is global, so I'll give a couple of examples, people that I really admire this in, and I'll talk to them about myself. For the Indian audience, I'll give the example of a very famous cricketer, MS Dhoni, who's obviously won World Cups for India. And one thing that really struck me, besides this, actually was not in the game. It was actually after he would win a game or he would win championships, he would never be standing up front. It would always be usually the most junior most person, and somebody sometimes don't even play the game. It would be in the squad, right? Who would maybe not get all the games, was holding the cup. Dhoni would always be in the back, but you sometimes wouldn't even see him in the picture of the winning shot, right? And to me, that's what servant leadership is about. It's not being in the spotlight. It's not being, the person that gets all the kudos. Great leaders give the credit to the team and take the heat when the heat is on. An example globally that people in the US may be familiar with, somebody that I really admire from entertainment industry, is somebody called Jon Stewart, who used to hold the Daily Show for years, and then they came back. And if you just look at his legacy and the way he operates, and anybody who's worked for him, so many people who work for him have actually gone and have phenomenal careers, like Stephen Colbert and other folks. And they all say that John didn't want to be on the spotlight. He didn't care about getting, all the credit. He would create an environment, and he would get people who were probably more talented than him at times, right? And he had the security to be okay with that, right? So I would say servant leadership is about understanding a leader's job is not always to have all the answers, and it's not always to be the smartest person in the room, and it's not definitely not to be the one who gets all the credit, right? Uh, and the way you do that is you actively listen to your team. You build trust by sitting in the feedback that they're giving you. At the same time, you create an environment of openness and accountability, right? Where you're giving feedback, but you're receiving feedback, and you're building this culture where people are accountable. And not because you're telling them that they need to be accountable, because they feel that sense of ownership, because they care about what the purpose of the organization is. So to me, that's what I think we all should aspire to do. That's what I aspire to do. And I think the way you really do it, start listening, take a step back, don't try to always have an opinion on everything, and bring people who are smarter than you in areas that you're not, right? And it starts with a level of self-awareness. Where are your gaps, and where do you need people who know that way better, right? And that's what I would encourage everyone. And that's the way I always look at building teams. The team cannot just be a replication of myself. Um, it has to be a team that is diverse in their skill sets and diverse in their talents. Somebody said that if I hire somebody who says exactly what I say every time, one of us is redundant. And I thought that was a wonderful way of thinking about it. Build teams that are diverse, uh, truly diverse in the way they think and act, and hire people who are really good at what they do, and then let them do it. Get out of the way, right? And then be in their service. What can you do to build that environment to make sure they can thrive? So that's what I would say. That's what it means to me, and that's what I'll look up to leaders who do that really well.
And how does this work for people who are starting off, first time managers, or when you yourself are in the initial years of your leadership journey? Being that self assured, or having that, I can work with people who are smarter than me, that requires a lot of self belief. So, how does that work for a person who is starting his or her leadership journey?
Yeah, no, I love this question because I do a lot of mentorship informally, especially for managers, leaders, aspiring to be senior leaders. Um, I think the first thing is, as you become a people leader, right? And by the way, leadership is not just about leading people, right? There are different ways you can lead, but I'm assuming you're talking about people leaders. So when somebody becomes a people leader, I think the first thing is a lot of times when it's the first time you become a people leader, you need to take a step back and ask this question to yourself: what was critical for my success as an individual contributor? And what is fundamentally different that I need to do for my success as a people leader now? Right. And I don't know how many people actually ask that question, right? Because a lot of times in organizations, unfortunately, what we do is we take great individual contributors who are fantastic at what they do and say, well, to develop, Sudhanshu, we're going to promote him into a people manager. And what happens at times, Sudhanshu may not want to be a people manager, but feels like the way he will grow his career is by becoming a people manager. So the first thing is be clear, do you really want it? And if you want it, what do you want? What does it mean? What's the fundamental shift? So that's the first question I would ask myself, or I would ask people who come to me for, any guidance. What I will tell them if they ask me, well, what is fundamentally different? I'm like, the fundamental difference is as an IC, you are fully, fully in control of your actions. When you're talking about a people leader, you are more and more reliant on other people doing their jobs so you can be successful and the team can be successful. And the question is less about, are you the smartest person? Are you really good at what you do? Yeah, that's table stakes, right? That's what you got here. The question is, how do you get the best out of them? Right? And that comes down to the environment that you need to create. And what I want to encourage people, and hopefully everybody, regardless of people lead or not, have been in part of teams, right? Whether it's work teams, sports teams, music teams, whatever. Like part of group of people could be your best friends, where you just felt that in that time, in that environment, you were at your best. The question to ask is, why did you feel that? What was about that time, that team, that environment that you just felt you could be real, you could bring your authentic self to that environment, you could do your best work, whatever that was, whether it was playing a sport or whatever. Um, and then kind of peeling that onion back and saying, that's the ingredients. And usually what it comes down to is a level of trust with people you're building, right? Where the environment is not telling you being prescriptive of what you need to do, but saying, hey, how do we really think outside the box? How do we be innovative? How do we, and we're not, it's not about one person, it's about all of us together. So I would say asking those tough questions and, uh, holding yourself accountable for building that environment is the big shift. Versus as an IC, you're not really quite doing that, right? You're really kind of very focused on my performance, right? Which is great, but the role is different and the expectations have to be different.
So very well put. And sometimes what I felt is this transition from an IC to the manager sometimes is in a flow where you start getting added responsibilities. One day somebody comes and tells you you're a manager now. There's a team reporting to you. People do not take a step back and ask these questions. If they do, they will of course understand the importance of investing in building certain capabilities. Now, we are in a place where people, as you said, are going to be key. They are already the key for organizations. Uh, and innovation is now very key to staying ahead in HR strategy or operations. And you spoke about building a culture of innovation. So, what are the HR practices you have implemented in your work which creates this culture of innovation within teams?
So I'll maybe even take it broader than HR in general, what I've done to build culture of innovation, right? So the first thing is you have to build psychological safety. And what I mean by that is, you're not going to be innovative if all you're worrying about is, am I screwing up, right? You have to take that level of fear away. That doesn't mean you're taking accountability away. And people sometimes think, well, you want me to be accountable, so how can I innovate? I'm like, accountability doesn't mean that I'm gonna get rid of you if you right if you don't you know get it right. But accountability is, hey, we tried this way, it didn't work. What did I learn from it? Now, if you're making the same mistakes, that's a problem. But if you're making different mistakes, that's great, right? Because you're figuring out new ways of doing things, and that's really, really important. Even somebody like Thomas Edison, right, who created the light bulb. Like, this is a story we've all heard, and somebody had asked him, this is anecdotal, of, well, you have failed 5,000 times. What do you think you're going to get it right the 5,001 time? He's like, I haven't failed 5,000 times. I figured out 5,000 ways not to do it. And that's the shift. The shift is, are you constantly looking at it as an opportunity and a learning? Because in the space we are in right now, especially as HR leaders, right, 90% of the jobs that are going to be in 10 to 15 years from now are not really clear. What are those jobs going to be in the world of AI? Like, people can, there's a lot of reports you can read out there, but nobody has really sort of the mirror to the future to actually say what other report, right? Did we know when we were growing up there's going to be a field like big data? Nobody went to school 30 years ago to study big data, I don't think, right? Or AI, right? It was very, it was still like seemed like science fiction, right? So same here, the rate at which technology is progressing and our lives are progressing, in 10, 15 years, we don't really know what's going to be out there. So the only way you get ahead of that is having this, what I call a learning mindset and an innovative mindset. And the people who are going to thrive in this, what I call sort of the AI economy moving forward, are going to be people who will continue to reinvent themselves. And the only way you do that is when you are not limiting yourself by what is, but what can be. And our responsibility as HR leaders or people leaders is, it starts with a space where you're not creating a fear about failure, but you're creating an environment about learning, right? And as long as you're learning, and again, things in SaaS, right? Fail fast, learn fast, right? So do it quickly. Don't get too ahead of yourself. Continue to invent. That's how we get better. And I'll give you one example, right? And I made this mistake myself in the past. This is a few years ago. And in my team, we were having a conversation and somebody had an idea to do something. And at the time, my first reaction, probably wasn't having a great day, was, this is a stupid idea, right? And I was kind of going down a path, I didn't say the word stupid, but I was basically kind of going down a path of probably, making that person feel like this wasn't a great idea. And then I caught myself in the middle of my train of thought. And I'm like, listen, what I'm doing is not actually questioning the idea. I'm questioning the ability to think differently. And I had to catch myself and apologize. And I said, listen, that was a very knee-jerk reaction on my part, right? I need to take a step back. Tell me more. Why do you think? Why are you thinking the way you're thinking? What do you think is going to work? And when you start doing that, maybe it's not about that idea. It's about that culture of thinking differently. And maybe the first, second, third idea may not get you to that like big thing, whether it's an operational when you're building products or whatever it is. But if you build that culture, you will encourage people thinking differently, doing things differently. We need to shift away from this culture of like, even the word performance at times, to a learning, truly learning culture. Are we building a culture of continuous learning where people are evolving? And with that, there has to be a threshold for not getting it right the first time, right? As long as you're learning and not making the same mistakes.
When you talk about building stronger teams, when you talk about psychological safety, you talk about trust and respect, open communication. Trust and open communication is fundamental to building these teams, right? Uh, and especially when we talk about a global workforce, a more diverse workforce, like say Salesforce or Freshworks, how do you foster that trust and open communication within teams?
It's a great question because it is a question of the time as well, right? And I think we've all gone through the pandemic. We're becoming more global. People are like, how do I build trust on Zoom, right? For example. the fundamentals don't change, right? I mean, if you just, I fundamentally believe if you simplify things, that's usually the answer, right? Um, so how do you build trust in general with people, right? You build trust with people by, in my experience, one is being open yourself. It starts with yourself, right? And as a leader, just know that there's a shadow of leadership. So if you act a certain way, that has a reflection, right, across the organization. And the higher you go, the more conscious you need to be. It's important to be vulnerable as a leader, right? And one of the things that I learned, it's a small thing, and I call it 8 minutes of getting to know each other. So when I joined VMware, right, we had a leader at the time that was, I think, the VP of the SVP of the renewal organization, fantastic leader. I hadn't met him when I interviewed him. I was a manager, but I was told he likes to meet everybody, and he was out on vacation when I joined, but you need to have one-on-one with him. But everybody scared me. What kind of person this is? This person physically was very big, kind of a bodybuilder type image, very focused. So Sid, when you meet him, make sure you look in the eye, do the handshake, blah 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 blah, right? So, and I don't usually get intimidated by people, but there was a level of nervousness, right? So when I went, I was waiting outside. He was inside. He was writing a call to the image, very strong looking, big guy there, comes in, strong handshake, very military style, has me sit next to him and goes, the first thing out of his mouth was, Sid, I just came from a leadership offsite. And so I'm going to give you a new exercise called 8 minutes of getting to know each other. And this is how it works. So he puts his iPad there and he puts a timer for 8 minutes, very precise. And he's like, I'm going to talk about my life for 8 minutes and personal life, like anything I can share, like my life journey. The deal is you don't get to interrupt me or ask any questions. And if you're comfortable, you get to do that for the next 8 minutes. It was amazing how quickly the image of this person, and as they started sharing their life story, they became human, right? Not this leader, this persona, but human, right? And then I did that. And from that day, I felt that we knew each other a little bit more beyond the surface, right? And everybody, including my manager at the time, would be like, oh, he's so soft on you. I mean, he's not soft on me. He just understands me a little bit more. And I've done that exercise every time I've joined teams, probably over 300 times with different people now. And it's amazing. Cross cultures, different environments. There is always a thread that stitches across all of us. And when we understand that thread, I think it builds connection and it starts building trust. That is incredibly empowering for your team, right? Because they're like, oh, they value my opinion, they value who I am. So I think it starts with vulnerability, it starts with openness, and it also, takes a level of self-awareness, right? It's very easy because you have done well in your career to think that, oh, I figured it out. And I think the time you say I figured it out is the time you stop learning and evolving. And the higher you go, the more important it is that you're understanding things from people who are closer to the details.
One thing that we have started here now that our startup is growing as well is that we have started a coffee with the founders, and it is being very well received because a lot of people coming to the company, they don't get to know who we are, what are our personal values, what our journeys are. I really believe that understanding the human behind the person or the position is very important in establishing trust. And you spoke about starting with JD and MBA, and you are also committed to for human rights. You work with children rights and asylum voices. I want to understand, how does your uh, education that you had, your passion for social justice, how does that impact your approach to leadership?
Earlier when I started, I was in law school, I used to do international human rights. I'm involved with the organization right now called Gift of Adoption that really focuses on kids with disabilities and siblings and how do we get them adopted, and give them safe and loving homes. And as a parent yourself, you can appreciate the biggest gift we can give our children is a safe and loving home. Um, I think for me, it's very simple as that, right? A lot of people in HR will talk about culture and culture fit, right? One of the best things that I heard, Mark Benioff, who's obviously the founder and leader of Salesforce, say values drive value, right? And it's a very, very simple thing, but I fundamentally believe it. I think two people can work together if they have different personalities, they come from different cultures, they work really well together. Look at our friends, right? They cannot work together if they're fundamentally different values. Being true to your values. And also, I always have come to this piece of I look at myself, and there's a poem that a long time ago when I, grew up even in India, there was a poem called "The Man in the Looking Glass." That I always kind of went back to. Recently, I started reading it again, and the basic concept of the poem, is a beautiful poem, was as long as the person looking back from the mirror is looking at you with satisfaction, you've done what you have. And if you're fooled the whole world, but the person with the glass, you cannot lie to that person, right? So to me, it's about that, right? So when things get, you're not always gonna get it right as a leader. You're not always gonna, you know, uh, deliver the way you need to, right? Things can happen. Sometimes things are out of control. But if you can stick back to your values and say, that's okay. As long as I did what I needed to, and I'm learning from this and moving forward, I think gives you context. It takes, we are living in a world of very high anxiety these days. It allows you to focus on what you control and not on things you don't control. And which is, it's a very funny way of saying, and not to kind of bring, sort of Hindu culture into this or Indian culture into this. It's what, has been said traditionally, right? Focus on your actions, right? And I fundamentally believe that. And I believe that, the more I can actually stay in that, the less I get overwhelmed and actually do my job way better. So I think it's really, really important to stick to your values, be clear about your values, and embody those values.
What is your vision, or how do you look at the future of HR?
If you ask the same question to a product leader, the first thing they would say is like, you're the technologist. You need to understand, the power of technology and what it can do, right? And I would say the same thing for the HR leader. The power that you have is you should understand people. You should understand talent. You should understand how you attract, retain, develop that talent. So so I think that's the superpower, right? And then now in the context where we are in a world that we have, I think, what, 5 generations in the workforce for one of the first times, right? We also in a world that technology is evolving at a rate that we've never seen before, right? What does that mean, right? Like, do we even know the jobs that I'm hiring in 5 years from now? I have no idea, right? So I think HR leaders need to have a very strong voice on at the management table, at the board table, to really influence and drive, you know, what is our talent strategy? What do our people need, right? And how do we create an environment? Because if you don't, you're not going to get the best products. You're not going to get the best sales motions at times, right? Because people are doing that, right? And even when we say, well, so we're going to automate this and that, yes, but people are still buying your products, right? If nobody's buying your products, like AI is not buying your product, right? People are buying. So even if you're using AI, I don't buy a vision that people are going to be irrelevant, right? I don't see that, because then who's buying the product? If nobody has a job, nobody's buying a product, right? So we'll always have that. Now, what we're expecting and the capabilities that we need are very different. And our job as HR leaders is to understand that, get ahead of that, and build the mechanisms, including the environments and the cultures, and to ensure we are winning in that talent battle, and not just getting the right talent, but ensuring they're enjoying being here. And that's and influencing a lot of leaders who may have come from very different leadership styles, to really understand what does it mean to be a leader, a people leader, especially an organizational leader, in where we are heading in the world of AI and beyond, right? And it's going to be drastically different at times, right? So I think there's a big opportunity for HR to coach and teach, as well as being a very strong voice, and get away from just a compliance or back office function, which I feel some of them are still playing.
That's very important. If you had to distill everything into one guiding principle or a mantra, what would that be?
It's about creating an environment that you and your teams are constantly learning. And I'm sure a lot of my peers may disagree with me. It's not about creating high performing teams as we move into the new world. It's really about creating an environment that we're constantly evolving and constantly learning, right? Performance will come if we are constantly evolving and learning. One of the great leaders that I worked for at VMware, she asked me, Sid, what is your kryptonite? Like, when would you leave? What should I be wary of? I'm like, I will leave the day I stop learning, right? And I fundamentally believe, for me, it's about, for myself and for my team, how do we constantly learn? How do we constantly problem solve? How do we constantly get better? That's, to me, that's my mantra. Like, keep learning and keep encouraging your teams to learn.
No, my father, he was a Sanskrit professor, and he was in the same job before he retired. Now he's living a retired life, and he taught the same author Kalidas for, I guess, 32 years. But even in his job, and I remember I still used to ask him this question: is why do you prepare before you go for your lecture every day? And he was like, literature is such a vast ocean that every time you read, you find something new, and you want to go prepared, not just go prepared, but add value. When you are in a space, you'll be with VMware, Salesforce, now at Freshworks. How important are people going to be for companies' competitive advantage, especially for technology companies going forward?
Yeah, I think critical. Ex-CEO of OpenAI said that we're not far away from a $1 billion one-person company, which is a very interesting concept. And again, I think leaders sometimes say things not because they actually believe the factual nature of that statement, but it pushes the thinking, right? And it made me think that I'm like, maybe it's possible. I mean, I'm not a technologist in that sense, right? But to me, the question then comes back to who is that one person? My fundamental hypothesis is we're going to see a lot more companies that the cost of innovation is going down with some of these technologies. So you will actually see a lot more companies that maybe are smaller in size but doing really well, right? But those companies are attracting top talent. Now you have a lot of companies trying to attract this talent, so that the talent pool is going to just go higher and higher, right? And unfortunately, and this is not in any way a social commentary or political commentary, but the education system, at least in the US and other places, are not quite ready for that, right? Are we getting enough people from the pipeline to actually do that, right? Are we focusing on the right skill set? Because I believe a lot of, and as parents of young kids, I still feel a lot of our education system is still rooted in the Industrial Revolution. So, and identifying what talent you need. And then the bigger challenge is, to me, is like, once you get that talent, how do you ensure that talent is interested to stay? That's what's going to come down to creating the environment where people want to stay, right? And I think that's the big challenge. And whoever wins that or will lead in the future.
And I was talking to one of the CHROs of a leading bank here in India, and she was saying that technology as a lever as for competitive advantage will cease to exist going forward. There were banks who could just create a competitive advantage because they had, say, millions of dollars to put in a mainframe earlier. In India, there were certain banks who adopted technology faster than others, and they got a huge runway for the next 10 years. Their apps were better, their internet banking was faster. The first 20 years of this millennium, they had a huge competitive advantage over the others. But if you now look at banks, their websites, their apps, the kind of technology they use, it has kind of become so ubiquitous, it is available for everybody to use. The kind of people you have to leverage that technology is going to be absolutely important. So if you have to say one movie that has influenced you in your leadership, or a movie that you look up to, what would that be?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about this. I think in terms of my leadership, so there's a Bollywood movie that came probably 20 years now called Good Will Hunting. Matt Dillon was this brilliant kid, mathematician, but came from pretty humble beginnings, which, you can probably resonate what's happening in India. The amount of talent that's coming all over, it's amazing, but always had a lot of challenges, right? Emotionally, and was in some sense getting in his own way to grow and be what he could be because of our own conditioning. And Robin Williams had this very wonderful, and he showed both in the character. On one end, very kind and compassionate, and one end, no bullshit, right? Of like really challenging him and asking the tough questions and not stepping back. And and to me, the beauty of that movie was how those two characters evolved, sort of interacted, and how you saw Matt Damon's character really evolved, right? So that movie really resonates and always has.
One historical figure that you look up to, if you had to have dinner with a historical figure, who would that be?
I think somebody that I've admired is Nelson Mandela's leadership. And I think, part of leadership we don't talk about is tenacity and struggle, right? And I think the amount of struggle he went through for a purpose and cause that he really believed in. I would love the opportunity to sit with him and just understand, how do you build that level of resilience, and how do you build that level of kindness towards people who have done horrible things to you and your people, right? So definitely, I think the opportunity, if I had to go back and have the opportunity to meet him, I'll be honored.
So, do you have a trick to get your team to get in a mood of meeting, or say you go? Is there something like a challenge that you throw at them?
More on getting people feel comfortable is I start my staff meetings with a quick check-in. And when I say a check-in, basically it's not a work check-in. It's a where are you now? Red, yellow, green, right? And emotional check-in, right? And because this was obviously, as all of us kind of felt a lot around the pandemic, as a leader, I've been in some of those meetings, I'm like, I'm red today, which meaning I am kind of like not at 100%, because, and it really, going back to creating psychological safety, creates vulnerability. Just that little bit of knowledge completely changes that perception. And I think that's what we all try to do, is trying to understand each other better so we can understand, our customers and employees better, right? So I do that very religiously. I don't think if it's as fun, but it does create an environment.
We spoke about different things, Sid, and I'm really this entire last 60 minutes have been very, very enlightening for me. It was engrossing because I was listening to you all this time. So what I would say is thank you so much for being part of this podcast. Thank you so much for bringing your experience, bringing your perspective and your values on this podcast. And I can't wait for it to get out and for our listeners to benefit from it.
No, thank you for. I enjoyed our conversation. I learned from you and your perspectives and things that you're sharing. It was a lot of fun. I can't believe the 60 minutes or so.